Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2013 Ford C-Max, we're going to be showing you how to install the Air Force One supplemental braking system. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that this is the right kit for you. So there's going to be a total of 5 main components needed to get your C-Max down the road behind your motorhome. First one's going to be the base plate, and the base plate's going to provide us with a solid and reliable connection point. That way we can hook our tow bar up to it. That tow bar is going to be the second component, and this is going to be the actual physical link that connects the front of our Ford to the back of our motorhome. The third main component is going to be safety cables, and these are pretty straightforward. You know, they're there in the event of an unlikely disconnect. They're going to keep everything paired together. The fourth main component is going to be your tow bar wiring, and what this is going to do is transfer the lighting signals from the back of your coach to the back of your Ford, keeping you safe and legal. And last but not least, the fifth main component is going to be a braking system. And what this is going to do is apply the brakes in your C-Max whenever you hit the brakes in your RV, helping to bring you to a more predictable and complete stop. When it comes to supplemental braking systems, you know, there's a ton of different ones available, and things can kind of get confusing pretty quick, you know. And not only with the braking systems, just flat towing in general, you know, there's a lot of different advice out there if you should use a tow dolly or flat tow like this and so on. I mean, right off the bat, I'll say, in my opinion, having a setup like this is definitely the way to go. But without getting too far off topic, I just kind of wanted to establish, you know, if this braking system will even work for your particular application. So with the Air Force One, it's a permanent type system that's going to stay with the vehicle, and it's specifically designed to work with motorhomes that have air brakes. So generally speaking, you know, your larger Class A type motorhomes. If I had a motorhome like this, I would definitely feel great about using the Air Force One. We've had a ton of experience with them. It's super easy to use and really reliable. You know, there's not a ton of different moving parts or anything like that. And so for me, why use something else when a kit's there that's specifically designed to work with motorhomes that have air brakes? You know, so kind of a no-brainer for me. But, you know, if you don't have air brakes on your motorhome, you're going to have to go a different direction. There's a couple of kits that I do like as far as a permanent type braking system goes. The Stay and Play is a great choice, similar to the Air Force One that we have here. Really easy to use and everything else. And then you can come across those portable type braking systems, ones that you know, you have to put in the vehicle and take out every time you want to flat tow. One of the easier ones that we've had experience with is the Brake Buddy Select 3. It seems to do a really good job. And it's very user-friendly, lightweight, and easy to set up and remove. One of the really nice things about this system is the fact that it is truly proportional, and that's because it's going to work off of your RV's air brake system. So what that proportional term means is that the brake pedal in your C-Max is going to match the amount of pressure that you apply here in the motorhome. So just to kind of give you an example on, you know, how that would work. Let's say, you know, maybe you're going down the road and you see a stoplight up ahead, and so you barely kind of get on the brakes just to kind of help come to a rolling type stop. C-Max is going to do the same thing. On the other hand, let's say if you're going down the interstate and maybe there's an accident up ahead or something like that, and you really got to come to a emergency type stop, and you really have to stand on that brake pedal to get things slowing down, the Ford is going to do the same thing. And so, you know, when it comes down to it, that's going to make your driving experience that much better. And I say it because, you know, not only is it going to shorten your stopping distance, but your stopping is going to be much more predictable, and it's going to help you, you know, come to a complete stop, actually. When it comes to setup time, whenever you're ready to flat tow, really doesn't get much easier than this, you know. And that kind of holds true for the majority of permanent type systems. With this one though, essentially all you're going to have to do is plug in your Airline from the back of the motorhome to the front of your Ford, and then your breakaway switch cable. So this tether here goes to your hitch and to your breakaway switch. Then obviously once your other components, other flat toe components are hooked up, you're ready to hit the road. And speaking of that breakaway switch, that's this component here. This is going to be a safety feature. And what's going to happen in the event of an unlikely disconnect, this pin would be pulled. And when that gets pulled, that's going to apply the brake in the C-Max. And that's going to help, slow things down and get everything back under control. So at the end of the day, kit you really cannot go wrong with, very reliable, easy to figure out, and it's going to get the job done. So, what more can you really ask for? I do want to address a question that we get as well before I forget. And that's, a lot of people already have, their motorhome set up with the Air Force One side and end up picking up a new towed vehicle and they want to stay with that system. Well, the good news is if that's your case, you don't have to get a whole new system. There's actually second vehicle kits available. That way you don't even have to worry about the motorhome side. You can just hook everything up on your C-Max and you'll be good to go. And the same holds true for just the motorhome side. If your car's already set up and you end up getting a new motorhome, you can pick up those components that just go on there. So you really have a bunch of different options. Now, as far as the installation goes, I'm not gonna lie, it is involved. Not really anything super confusing, really just kind of time consuming. So as long as you stay focused, really shouldn't give you a ton of issues. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and hook everything up together now. To begin our installation on our C-Max, we're gonna start mounting up all of our major components. Now, we have the front end apart here, the fascia removed. And that's because we're installing this setup the same time that we did our base plate. It just makes it easier. You have a lot more room to work. But that said, this isn't absolutely necessary. But moving on, first thing that we're going to do is mount up our main operating unit, which is located right here on the passenger side of our vehicle. So here's how I fashioned up our operating unit. I kind of just bent these mounting tabs a little bit. And it turns out there's a factory mounting tab here, and I just angled it in such a way that our hood can close and everything else, so pay attention to that. But I just use a nut and bolt there. Then on the edge of our engine cover here, it's just straight plastic. I just drilled a small hole in it and put a nut and a bolt there, and this thing is super solid. It is not going anywhere. From there, what you want to do, with this particular vehicle, we're not going to be using the vacuum port, and so we just need to cap that off. I just used a vacuum cap I had laying around and zip tied it to cover that off. And then we can focus on hooking up at least one of these wires here. So there's going to be two black wires, and one of them is going to be a ground. It does not matter which one you use, either one of these wires. So our wire just runs along through here, down there, and then if you look in the corner there, you can see a good solid piece of our body there, nice thick metal piece. That's what I grounded that wire to. So I just crimped on a ring terminal, used a self-tapping screw, and got that secured. At this point, we can move on to mounting up our air valve there, as well as our breakaway switch. With this, I used made a bracket here that just clamps around the base plate, comes and bends out, and pretty straightforward from there. I simply just fashioned our breakaway switch to it and drilled a hole, used a screw and a nut, and same thing with the Airline. Just made a couple holes and used some nuts and bolts to secure that fitting. With that said though, what we're going to do now is hook up the Airline to the back of this fitting and run it up to our operating unit. So all we're going to do is cut our Airline a nice clean end, and this is a quick connect fitting here. That'll just plug right in. I'll kind of give you a better shot of that once we get up to our operating unit where we can actually see a little bit better. But we need to route the line and do our best to avoid, any hot or moving parts. So we just shot it straight through here right on up, kind of behind her headlight. So the airline's gonna come whoop, right up through there. And here we can plug it into the air in portion there on our main operating unit. So told you guys I'd show you how to do it and cut the line. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that the line is cut nice and clean. So you can use a pair of snips like this. There's a tubing cutter or even just a razor edge. But when you cut this, you know, you want to make sure it's straight and there's no burrs or anything. So try to stay away from a regular pair of snips. A lot of times those will pinch it up. Once the line is cut properly, with these quick connects, they all work the same. It simply just plugs right in. You'll kind of feel it snap into place, and that's all there is to it. Moving back to the front here, now we can run our breakaway switch wires. So there's two that come off it, a black one and an orange one. And these I simply just ran along through here, and kind of down, and right up through here. Now our wires weren't long enough, so I did have to extend them using some butt connectors. The black wire from the breakaway switch, I just used another black wire to extend it, maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 foot. And the orange wire, all I had was a piece of red wire, so just pretend that red wire is orange. But with that said, those are just gonna continue on right up behind the headlight into the engine compartment, essentially the exact same way that the other side was routed. So that black wire comes up into the engine compartment right here, and this is actually going to get routed towards our main operating unit. So I just ran it, you know, along through this way here, kind of zip tied it to some factory wiring and tubing along the way, and that black wire is going to get connected to the other remaining black wire coming off of our main operating unit. So I just used a butt connector to complete that connection. So back to that red wire that we routed up here. You know, this was originally the orange wire that we extended. Eventually this will get hooked up, but not quite yet. We have a couple other things we need to do first, and then we can come back to it. So moving on to the inside of our vehicle, now we're going to come up to our rear view mirror and mount up our indicator light. So pretty straightforward. Make sure the surface is clean, and this light just has some sticky tape on it. I stuck our light to the back of our mirror here, and then there's a wire that come off it that we need to route down to our floorboard. The way I routed that wire coming off of our indicator light, simply just pushed it kind of underneath this plastic cover. Once I got to the headliner, you can simply just tuck that wiring in, that opening on your headliner, and just continue to route it all the way over as far as you can. So once you get to the corner here, you can just kind of pull back on that pillar there, tuck the wiring in between there. Then all the way down here, you can kind of just peel back this weather stripping some, tuck that wire in there. So that's going to run all the way down until here where these two panels meet. You can just tuck that wire in behind it, and it's going to drop out right here where we can get it hooked up. So before we worry about getting these wires hooked up, we're going to mount up our actuator cylinder, which is this component right here. First thing we're going to do is clamp the actuator cylinder to the brake pedal arm. You may have to swap out the original bolts for the longer ones that come included, just in case if it doesn't fit around the brake pedal arm if it's too thick. So just keep that in mind. But once you have this clamped on here, then there's going to be a cable that comes off the back with an anchor, and we can get that mounted. So here's a cable that comes off the actuator cylinder, and you want this to be as straight as possible, you know, that way when brake pedal arm gets pulled down, it's kind of a nice straight shot. Don't have a ton of room to work with here, so I had to kind of improvise a little bit. But I did, so this silver bracket actually comes with the kit. I grabbed another one just to be on the safe side. I don't really think it is absolutely necessary, but that bolt there in the middle, that's what I use just to kind of bolt the two brackets together for a little extra strength. The top hole there, I enlarged it big enough to fit around that factory stud. So you can pull that nut off using a 13 millimeter, slide that bracket over, tighten it back down. Our anchor down here, I simply just used a nut and a bolt to anchor that, and you can fashion it in a way that, you know, makes your cable straight. Keep in mind though, you know, you want it to clear other components too, so just something to think about. But with that said, once that's in place, then you can adjust the tension on your line there. And you don't want it super tight or super loose. You want to be able to, you know, have some movement there in the actuator cylinder. And once you find that appropriate tension, there's going to be a set screw on the bottom right here, and you can use a 4 millimeter Allen key to snug down that set screw. Now we can start to get some things hooked up. So we'll do our indicator light first. This is going to get connected to the wires coming off of our actuator cylinder. So the red wire from our indicator light, that's going to get connected to the black wire coming off of our actuator cylinder. The blue wire from our actuator cylinder, that's going to get connected to the black wire from our indicator light. And what I've done is took an extra piece of a wire here, which is this black one, and stripped it back and put both of those ends here in this butt connector. Eventually this will get routed to the engine compartment, which we'll check out in a moment. The brown wire coming from our actuator cylinder, that's going to get connected to a brown wire that comes in our kit. Just use the butt connector. And again, this will get routed into the engine compartment as well, along with that black wire. But once we have those hooked up and we're going to route them out there, we might as well do everything at once. Which brings me to my next point. If you look at our actuator cylinder, it's going to have an air fitting on it. And what you want to do, just like how we hooked up the one outside, take your airline, cut it clean, plug this in, and that's going to get routed outside as well. So all these wires in the line is going to come up through a grommet right under the dash here in this area. So if you look up on our firewall, you will have to kind of pull off some of that insulation, but there's going to be a pretty big rubber grommet actually, and you can just cut a hole in it and then take your airline tube and those wires and feed them through it. So now here in the engine compartment, right here in this area, this is where our wires and our airline tubing came out, and we'll just get our airline tube knocked out of the way. I simply just routed this along the top of our motor here, cut it clean, and that gets plugged into the air out fitting there on our operating unit. Moving back to our wires, so if you remember, we had a brown one and a black one. The black one, that's going to get grounded, and so I just ran that straight down, and there's actually a factory ground down there. It's kind of buried, but you can get to it. What you're going to do is remove the bolt using an 8 millimeter socket, crimp on a ring terminal to that black wire, slide it over, and tighten everything back down. So the brown wire and that red wire that we left hanging earlier, you can get those hooked up. What you're going to do with these, strip back both ends and twist them together. I'm going to get them nice and tight. I'm going to take a butt connector, slide it over, and crimp it down. And from there, we're going to hook that up to a fuse holder. So I already kind of prepped it. One end I stripped back, put on a ring terminal. The other end, we're going to get that stripped back. It's going to get connected to the butt connector there. get it crimped down, and then since this is a heat shrink, I'll come back with my heat gun and seal up the ends. Now we need to get this ring terminal hooked up to power. There's a power supply right here. Just pop that cover off. And before you hook anything up, you want to make sure that the fuse is not installed. We'll do that at the very end once everything's hooked up and everything. With that said, we're going to use this stud here. And so we're going to remove that nut using a 13mm socket. Get that carefully pulled off. Take a ring terminal. I'll work that into position. I'm probably going to switch these around here, put the smaller one on top of it. Once we have it on though, simply take the nut and tighten it back down. And at this point, we can simply grab our included fuse, get that plugged in, close up that dust cover, and kind of get all of our wiring and everything else cleaned up. To begin our motorhome install, we're going to be working here on the passenger side towards the back right here in this area, just underneath of it. So underneath the motorhome, just to give you guys another reference point, what we're going to be doing is mounting up our tank, and that's going to be located right here. So here's our tank mounted up, and keep in mind, you know, every motorhome is going to be a little bit different, you know, depending on the floor plan and everything else like that. So just keep that in mind. With that said, we want to mount the tank, you know, up and out of harm's way. So in our case, we have this storage box here with some, you know, steel support that runs around it. And so I just used 2 self-tapping screws to secure the bottom of our tank to the supports. And then I just fashioned a just a bracket that runs from side to side, and use screws to secure the tank to that bracket. This thing is very solid, so we shouldn't have anything to worry about. Now we can start to route some of our airlines towards our factory lines where we're going to make a connection. So you want to make sure your hose is clean cut. Push that right in to the quick connect fitting. This line here, this fitting, that's going to go to our supply line from our motorhome. And this one here, this is going to get connected to the metered air on our motorhome. So we'll get to that in a minute, just keep that in mind. But with that said, this line and this line are going to come up and get routed towards the front of our motorhome. Now when you're routing these, everything's pretty open actually, but you want to make sure to do your best and avoid any hotter moving parts. So here's where our lines get connected to the factory lines. This is the metered air side, and this large one up here is the supply side. So you're going to take the included T's, cut those lines, and quick connect them and tee everything in. Now, the supply line is usually a lot thicker in green, and that's going to have consistent air pressure. The metered air, you're only going to get air pressure whenever you hit the brakes. So with the metered air one quick way you can check is you can disconnect it. This is a quick connect, and have someone hit the brakes, and if air comes out of here, you know that's the metered air. So once you identify that, before you cut these lines, so you want to make sure to drain your air tank so you can hit your brakes a whole bunch with the motorhome off, drain all that air pressure. That way when you cut the supply line, you don't have a bunch of pressure and stuff going everywhere. So pretty straightforward. Once you have these teed in, these connections are done. Back at our tank, we're going to have one more line to run. This one here, that one's going to run to the back of our motorhome where we have the fitting that will allow us to plug into our towed vehicle. So again, clean cut, push it in. And this one's just going to run along this wiring here. Or just continue straight on back to the hitch of our motorhome. So that airline, like I said, gets routed all the way back here to the hitch and gets connected to our air fitting there. And this is pretty straightforward. I just used a what's called a no drill long bracket, clamped that around the hitch, bolted our fitting up to it, and plugged the air connector in. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Air Force One supplemental braking system on our 2013 Ford C-Max.